Hi everybody, welcome to the next in the series of ISE webinars. Today we are talking about female talent in STEM and tech. I'm joined by Tareem and Ali from Higher STEM Women, and also Dan from Capgemini. Just before I hand over and we get the session started, just a little bit, give you an idea on how these sessions work. Because we get so many people joining our webinars, we have you all as attendees on mute. If you want to ask a question, please use the dialog box. So use the dialog box, pop your question into there, and then what I will do is I'll play back those questions to our presenters at the end of the session. The session records automatically. You will get a link back to the session once it's downloaded and finished with. Feel free to share that around to any colleagues. The link will also go onto our website tomorrow, where you'll also be able to visit and go back and cover if there's anything that you want to revisit. So that's all from me. I'll come back on at the end. Let's get cracking. Tareem, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for that. Brilliant. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. Thank you for joining the webinar. And just to echo what Steve mentioned, today we are going to be talking about the current female technology market in collaboration with Capgemini. We've got Dan today, as well as my colleague Ali, who'll be joining me explaining our latest survey findings. So just to kind of summarize what to stay in today's webinar. So I'll talk a little bit about us as a company, and Dan will go through our partnership with Capgemini and how Capgemini is using technology and trends during COVID-19. I'll also be sharing our current female technology market and results from our survey findings. We'll also briefly talk about COVID-19 challenges for employers, as well as our solutions and our approach to events in light of the current situation, followed by Q&A. So if we go on to the next slide, to give you a little bit of context about Higher STEM Women, so we're also known as HSW, and we're a graduate and undergraduate platform for women looking for STEM careers, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. And we have a data-driven approach in attracting female STEM talent. So, for example, we work with HESA data and target talent for our attraction campaigns. And we help women by giving them the confidence to pursue a STEM career through targeted mentoring and coaching. So our mission really is to help industry employers discover STEM female talent through digital technology recruitment. So let's go to the next slide. So I'll hand over to my colleague Ali, who will give you a broader picture of our network.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Tareem. So yeah, this slide just talks about our network. So as you can see that we've got women from STEM backgrounds, around 52,000 plus. And the breakdown below is basically just to give you an idea of the degree subjects that we have. So computer science, 13.7%, engineering and technology, 33%, science, 37%, and maths, 16.3%. So this slide just really talks about our network. If we go on to the next slide. So this slide basically talks about the current female technology market. So this data was published by HESA in Jan 2020. And as you can see that there are two tabs here. So females taking up computer science degree courses and again, engineering and technology degree courses. So we can see on year, there has been a slight increase in the number of females taking up these degree subjects. But it's nowhere near if we compare it to their male counterparts. So just to give you an example, if we pick up year 2018-19 in computer science degree course, we can see on the slide that the total females that took up this degree subject was 21,080. But if we compare it to the male counterparts, the males were 93,535. So around 5 times the number, which is a massive difference between them. And we can also look at another number, which is for engineering and technology degree courses. So again, focusing on the year 2018-19, we can see on the slide that 31,580 were females were studying this degree course. And if we compare it with their male counterparts, 133,515 were studying this course. So again, around 4.5 times more than their female counterparts. So it just basically gives you an overview of the technology market. And also to point out that the numbers which I mentioned are all year groups, so starting from the first till the final. Now I would like to hand over to Dan from Capgemini, who will talk through our partnership with them and their approach to COVID-19. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Ali. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So yeah, I just wanted to talk you through for the next maybe 10-15 minutes or so about what we're currently doing and have been doing with higher STEM women, some of the challenges and successes we've had recent years this year and maybe going forward, and then just share some, I guess, insights or I guess tips that we should all be probably considering coming out the other side of COVID, as and when that may be. If you just want to go on to the next slide, it will give you a bit of a breakdown about what I want to talk about. So just starting with the 5 columns, in terms of the partnership, been working with higher STEM women mainly from last year onwards. We had some success with some very niche roles and locations where we recruit and stereotypically based on the subject data that you've just seen before, it gives us a organic, I guess, deficit or disadvantage when we look to have an equal gender split coming into the front end of the funnel. So like higher STEM, when we have a very data-centric approach, and we understand that obviously pre-engaged and warm candidates perform better in processes generally than those who are standard organic applicants. And to bring some life to that, you probably find that with various channels where we have data-centric or pre-engaged approaches, the success of applicants at assessment centre stages is around 1 in 3 to 5, whereas an organic random applicant that may have seen a role on LinkedIn or Indeed or maybe stumbled across you at a careers fair and didn't really engage, picked up a leaflet, for example, is more like 1 in 20 plus. I know there was another webinar this week which suggested that the application to hire ratios in some industries are 1 to 80, 1 to 100 and even more, which is crazy from an inefficiency perspective. We continue to use higher STEM women in this campaign as well to help us with particular locations which are not graduate sort of location where they expect to find graduates in abundance, either as existing local candidates or people who are moving back there, or we're competing with some big metropolitan areas which are local. So to give some context around that, it's the likes of Telford and Worthing, which are not far from Birmingham and London from a commutable perspective. So we're competing with ourselves, with our own roles, our own pipeline, never mind direct industry competitors. And that's quite hard. So we need that level of additional support, guidance, steering, education with the candidates to find out a bit more about an employer which is not in the public domain. It's not a consumer brand. They don't know who we are unless we speak to them. And it's helping us to support the 50-50 gender focus, which is important for a lot of companies. As we know, it's nothing new, but we are well on track, as we were last year, to achieve that by doing that little bit extra with the smaller percentage of candidates at the front end of the funnel. Going on to the second part, I wanted to just talk to you about virtual assessment centres. There's been quite a few of the ISE community that have helped in recent months with some of the webinars that have been run with the likes of Rowena Back and people like that to share. And I think this situation that we're all in has, if anything, increased the collaboration amongst employers and the sharing of insights. And you only have to go on LinkedIn to see that daily. you know, and the newsletters we get from Steve and his team as well. It is more than ever we are collaborating, and again, I kind of just wanted to follow that trend as part of this call. There's obviously lots of existing corporate platforms that people are considering to run their assessment centres virtually out of, for ease, for speed, for cost savings. We ourselves have ran them through Microsoft Teams with very little technical or experience glitches. We've had 100% attendance rates for assessment centres solid for the last 7, 8, 9 weeks. And the speed in the process before assessment centres to react to emails, to complete digital interviews, we've seen the trend show that the time to complete is far, far quicker than it ever has been. The briefing calls that happen with the candidates using those systems is really key. It removes that need to provide any apprehension. It reassures them that if they're not a user of Skype or Teams or Zoom or anything like that, that they're going into the unknown. They may well have been to an assessment centre before, had an interview for a job, but doing it virtually with other people in a platform they are not familiar with, you know, that even though they're an audience that are likely not to be technophobes, there is still a level of apprehension. They're going for, you know, a career, for a role. There's a lot at stake. So reassuring them, making sure they've got an environment which is comfortable for them to show themselves in the best light is vital, absolutely vital. And because of that, we've seen that the acceptance rates, the offer rates, and I guess the conversion rates from assessment centres have stayed, if not increased, since then. So just consider whether you are replicating your assessment centre model virtually, or whether you're having to re-engineer that. We were lucky that we could replicate, but we didn't need to re-engineer things. When I talk about re-engineering, it's a case of obviously completely revamping what activities you do, because the ones that you have are very face-to-face, practical, hands-on, and therefore it becomes a little bit difficult to create a virtual version of that without detrimenting the performance of candidates or the strengths or competencies that you're assessing them against. Making sure that candidates feel valued and known is superseding the glitz and glamour. So this was, I guess, part of the summary that came off the back of the employers collaborating in recent weeks, having done lots of VACs. And I think, again, this links to stuff around authenticity, that, you know, we ourselves as an employer don't have that glitz and glamour front end product to sit behind. Even at our assessment centres, the offices are not going to be, you know, a Google like, Facebook. They're not there to draw the attention. It's the basics really around the people and how they feel and whether they feel comfortable and engaged in that environment on the day. And you can do that virtually as well. The impact we've had, I mentioned around the 100% attendance. The conversion rates have been great and still remain very high. It's created some time efficiencies in the delivery of the assessment centres, because our assessors, probably more so, are looking at it a bit like their diary in their day. The way that we have it planned is that it's driven out of Outlook, and that is their day planned for them, and they can go between different virtual rooms just as they would between meetings, webinars, calls, etc. Reduction in costs, obviously travel expenses for assessors, facilitators and for candidates has been massively reduced. We recruit from multiple locations across the country, and we don't recruit them on the day always in that location. They can be across the Midlands, North and into the South East. So that has removed some barriers potentially for people who have to outlay costs which are reimbursed for candidates, but there is still that element of actually funding that to begin with, which could be a sizable amount if you're traveling from the northwest down to the southeast, for example. And it's created a bit of a green status, I guess, amongst our printing, with having less paperwork involved in those assessment centres. And I just wanted to move on to another section, which was around the content consumption and heightened focus. And I think there's a lot of talk about this generation, and generally all of us. We are now attending more webinars. I think we were talking about this, Tareen, before the call, that the adoption rates for webinars, and we found ourselves with candidates, has been sky high. Our organic registered interest pages, which are not heavily advertised as such, are 8-fold in terms of registrations without doing an ounce of marketing. And it backs up these things that were happening before COVID, which was that this younger audience are heavily influenced by what's happening on social media. We know that, but probably not so much about how influential careers-related content is on there. You can see some quotes from the Youth Site reports recently with the Rate My Apprenticeship conference, where they showed that of the people they surveyed, 41% wanted to learn about careers in their feed. Okay, maybe 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk about not wanting to intercept their social channels with programmatic ads, sponsored ads, content which is going to disrupt what they're wanting to see their friends talking about or whatever. But we live in an influencer world, and those influencers don't have to have blue ticks. And then very finally, we will probably see and ongoingly see a rise in consumption on those channels going forward. I think there was an 8% rise in video watching on YouTube, and I think it's just going up and up and up. And we ourselves are contributors to that content and curators of that content. So we have a responsibility to make sure that those people and those influencers can actually see that information happening now more than ever. And that's regardless of whether you are actually recruiting at the moment. And that goes into what is the fifth column, which is outlook and consideration. So there's a lot of articles coming out at the minute around what the company's focuses are when they reopen, if they're closed at the moment, and that is largely focusing around reopening their needs to hire talent. And are you as an organisation going to be ready? Some people have more lead time than others, but do you have a candidate bank ready to go? Okay, people forget that you open a role, you go live, and you will only receive applicants from those who see it in that time window. What about the people who could have seen it now? What about the people that will have seen it after the application window closed? Have you missed out on them? Did they miss out before? Could they be reintroduced to 2021 campaigns? So have a look at your attraction strategy as well, and your assessment selection strategy. Is it that this will move towards a much more digital focused campaign? We have some severe success with programmatic advertising, which is very cost effective for us, and it goes to people who are interested in the content that they're actually reading and seeing. And most of you on the call will not see that content because you don't fit in the demographic that we're trying to reach, whether it's location, gender, or any other agendas that we're trying to help balance out. Will companies adopt a more year-round intake approach? We have a year-round intake. As a consultancy, we have to be flexible to be able to respond to changes in different industries we support with our consultants. We don't have a cyclical September intake. We don't have a set window. We recruit 24/7. We're still open now. We have a few roles left. If you have graduates that are or students or family or friends that are looking for roles at the moment in some locations, we may be able to support that. And I'm going to end with the employer brand piece, because again, there's a lot of talk about this, but what are you as an employer actually doing to keep your brand intact, particularly those who don't have a consumer brand where that can be looked after for them, in the sense of people reusing your goods as an FMCG, or driving your car, or receiving goods from a manufacturer that's built it. We don't have that luxury to sit behind that and let that do it for us. So we are remaining very, very active. We are supporting those who, where roles have been removed, where we have still got roles, we're still supporting them in the same way, whether that's to try and help them secure a role in other industries, other companies, or whether that's to keep them warm ahead of 2021, because we will need those candidates. But we are aware that there will be competition for them when roles become much more fruitful, I guess, later in the year. So hopefully that's been quite useful. I think, Steve, you potentially got some questions at the end, or may have some now, but you're happy to field some if there is any.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Dan. That's useful. We're on the next slide. Great. So just to give you a little bit more information about our survey that we did earlier on this year. So to give you a bit of context, we surveyed around 2,500 women and asked them what support they needed to help them get the right role in technology. So I'll talk you through some of the questions we asked and what those results looked like. So we gave women 4 options to choose from, which I'll kind of talk through in a little bit more detail in the next slide. So the first question was, what is the perception of the technology industry amongst female STEM students? If we go on to the next slide. So the perception at the moment is women felt that they have to have coding skills in order to apply for a technology role or even approach a technology company. So around 31% mentioned that they had to have coding skills in order to apply for a technology role. They also perceived that the industry is male dominated. So around 30% mentioned that they find the industry quite male dominated, which is true. However, what they don't realise that there's a lot of support available for them. And I guess going on to the perception that there is a lack of female role models in the industry as well. So around 24% perceived that there isn't much influence from females in tech. And around 13% said there were other reasons that they thought kind of their perception within technology. So if we go on to the next slide, I can kind of talk our saying. So the perceptions of the tech industry amongst women is, one woman mentioned she's looked into many tech jobs but could not apply due to not having a tech-related degree. Another lady mentioned eyebrows were raised when she said she wanted to work in technology, referring it as a place to find a husband rather than a normal workplace. So that's just to kind of briefly summarize the comments women made, and then I guess the other 2 paragraphs, I am conscious it is a little long, so I won't read through that. So I'm sure this recording is taking place, so you can view that separately. But just to kind of summarize very quickly what other women were saying, the perception of work done by males is worth far more, and women are not able to manage tech roles due to their physical attributes. These were some of the comments that were being flagged by women who we surveyed. Going on to the next slide. So the second question we asked women was, what is the biggest barrier female students face when wanting to get into a career in technology? So if we go into the slide. They're quite similar to the first results that I shared with you. So again, the perception to have coding language is a must. Around 33% stated that. Around 28% said a barrier was for females to apply for tech roles. Around 28% said online assessments. So too much pressure on telephone interviews, for example, was one of the comments a female made. Around 20% mentioned companies not able to sponsor visas was another barrier, and around 17% spoke about other reasons as well. So for example, what women were saying, so just to quote one of these, so sometimes a degree exposes you to different programming languages, but does not focus on one specifically, so you cannot learn it really well. Therefore, you get a sense of being a jack of all trades, master of none. That's why technical exams for jobs put me off, because they are usually focused on one language, which you would have to know really well to pass. That's one quote one woman said to us. And then I guess earlier on, as I mentioned, to quickly summarize, too much pressure on telephone interviews and a long interview process could be seen as a barrier amongst women as well. So if we go into the third question. So what are the major contributing factors in joining a technology company? So here's what women said. So one of the biggest contributing factors is the training and development piece. So a lot of women are more likely to apply for a tech role if they felt that there is a strong training and development program in place. It's around 33%. Around 29% said salary played a huge part, and around 22% spoke that branding was a contributing factor as well, and 14% mentioned other reasons. So I guess one of the other reasons women spoke about was workplace environment and culture being really important. And I quote what another woman said: "I think women can feel pretty intimidated entering into such a male-dominated field, especially without the proper training. Knowing where to look to gain the training and which training to get is difficult when you don't know what's appropriate for what role." Going on to the next slide. So what can you as employers do to help women enter into technology roles? So here's what women said. So around 31% spoke about conducting insight events for more technology exposure. Around 27.4% talked about fast track opportunities. So I'm not sure how feasible this is for employers, but a lot of women liked the idea of being able to skip online assessments such as coding tests before applying to companies. And then around 27% spoke about eliminating strict academic requirements, such as, for example, being in a Russell Group university, or even having 2 A's or a B at A level, for example, specific roles. And around 13.56% spoke about other reasons, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So just to kind of see what else women are looking for, what's the expectation from women when applying for roles, or encouraging them to apply to different tech schemes. So one of the ladies said the ability to reach out to someone to discuss roles openly. Another lady spoke about her interview experience. So she, quote, "All of the interviewers for her 7 assessment days were all interviewed by men, and it would be helpful to see more women at these stages." And just to quickly summarize what the big paragraph, students like the idea of events and exposure to technology such as insight events. So going on to the next slide. And what would make women withdraw their application to a firm for a technology role? So around 32% said online lengthy application questions. Around 29% said the delay in feedback for the outcome of their assessment. So for example, video interviews or an assessment center. And then another reason for withdrawal was video interviews. Around 12% said there were other reasons. So just to quickly summarize the quotes that what women were saying. So video interviews don't necessarily portray someone's ability. So the first paragraph summarizes that. So hiring someone with less experience and desire to learn will be more fruitful for organizations. And the lack of mental health support for women or overly strict criteria for roles would throw someone off. Going on to the next slide. That summarizes the results from our survey and what women have been informing us. And just to kind of talk through a little bit more about the COVID-19 challenges for employers, some of which Dan mentioned earlier on. So I guess the uncertainty of booking physical events or campus events, be that campus events or even insight events, start date challenges for September graduate intakes as well. And I guess just a quote from ISE's webinar on the COVID-19 update in April this year. So quote, "Some summer placement schemes have been cancelled this year, and a key concern has been to continue to engage with those students who have already been hired in Keep Warm activities." Go to the next slide. So what are we doing as STEM women to deal with the current pandemic, as we say? So we've got a very digital focused approach this year and in the next couple of years. And we want to use a lot of technologies to kind of promote different opportunities to women. We're doing a virtual fair on the 5th of October. So if anyone is interested, please feel free to get in touch with me. And also we're doing a lot of virtual insight events as well. So if we go into the next slide, I can kind of display my details. Feel free to screenshot our details and get in touch with us. We'll be happy to give you more information about what we're doing in the digital space. Give a second for screenshot. And I guess let's go on to the next slide. So I'm open to any questions and answers from the audience. Thank you very much. sure if Steve is there. Hi, Steve.
Is he on mute?
I'm not sure. I'll ping him an email.
I suppose something's gone wrong with my technology. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Fantastic. All right. So you're on laptop speaking now, so this may not sound quite as good. So I don't quite know what's happened there. So, I was going to say, if you want to pop any questions into the dialogue box, one question from me to get us going: do any of you think that actually, because of the crisis, it's going to be harder for employers to hire female students, or easier, or just the same?
I would actually say it would be harder in the sense that women have a perception at the moment that not many companies are hiring. So some of them have already lost hope. However, when we educate them that there are still opportunities available, especially in the tech space, I think that does give them that bit of confidence to kind of explore the opportunities further. However, I do think from an employer perspective, it just kind of depends on the demand from their end. Ali, do you have anything to add to that, or Dan?
I was just going to say, obviously we're not quite sure when things will look the same as they were before, in terms of the number of roles, and when there are certain peaks and troughs with role availability. In terms of attracting them, I think the minute you mentioned there about, there's maybe some confidence has been knocked. I think that is regardless of whether it's male or female. But from an employer perspective, you would argue a case that if we're still recruiting, or companies are recruiting earlier for 2021 as well, that they may find that there's less competition and therefore there's more applications to their roles. Just based on sort of consumer trends, I suppose, or applicant trends. The more opportunities there are out there, potentially the more attractive that industry is. So therefore that might increase applications. But as I said before, I think the crux of it are that people who are working in early careers recruitment, graduate recruitment, whatever you want to call that, there's going to be a point when they surely will be recruiting again, and some level of interaction, engagement, and I guess giving back and loyalty towards those candidates will be reciprocated. And we've already seen that ourselves with those who've committed to be considered for later intakes if their role that they've applied for has moved out or has been postponed, etc. So that they're more. I think the other trend is obviously that they're more. We may see less offer and eggs as well if there's less alternative options for them. So companies may find there's more loyalty in this turbulent time with offers that they have given out, that candidates might well be less prone to cause any attrition rates later down the line because of the opportunity that they did secure during this difficult period.
Just to follow on, have you got any concerns with making offers just from the virtual process? Are you pretty comfortable that it's it's as good as it would be pre-crisis?
We haven't had any concerns as such now. I think there's business areas who have hired through virtual platforms in the non-early career space before. It's obviously not there to replace a face-to-face or in any way suggest that it's exactly the same or gives you the exact same experience, but we've replicated things as much as we can, and the experience that the candidates get and what they have to do on the day itself has been kept as similar as possible. And the assessors, obviously, as well as the facilitators, are aware of the key differences between the two. The candidates less so, because they wouldn't have gone through a face-to-face and a virtual one with us. But they themselves had some level of apprehension, of course. Everyone was going into the unknown. But I think from the outputs, the scores, the offers that have been made, they've been mildly surprised, and they've not, obviously allowed any kind of level or bias to creep in, or any kind of level of extra understanding as such, you know, to formulate some sort of bias or drop in quality. We haven't done that. It's remained pretty much the same as before.
I think just adding on to that, a lot of the females we've been speaking to like the fact that everything is virtual. So I guess it's only been positive, but I agree with Dan. I think it's just a case of, you know, nothing beats kind of face to face. However, I think in the current pandemic, I think a lot of the students are grateful that they don't need to travel a lot to assessment centres in the current pandemic, so that gives them that sense of security.
I wouldn't just a point on that. I think if employers are apprehensive or are, I guess, worried about the how successful the delivery or the outcomes of those assessment centres would be, if that's the reason not to continue to hire versus not having jobs or work to do, then I'd make sure that we do continue to share the good practice or share good stories, success stories amongst the early careers community, because it is absolutely doable. It doesn't necessarily require you know, purchasing big, you know, solutions as such. If it was to go long term like that, then that's obviously a different question, but it can be done with an existing platform that you probably as a corporate have access to, give or take some group IT probably steering and guidance and approvals.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Dan. And actually, if anybody listening to this wants to visit our podcast, we've got a podcast with Nick from Fujitsu and Kate from FDM, who talk about how they, you know, very rapidly move their interviews and assessment processes online using existing tools that were out there. They didn't have to go and find new platforms to do it. So very much it can be done, and they echo some of your comments. And one brief question, Dan, you mentioned 100% attendance. So does that mean you're getting better attendance virtually than you would do if you were doing sort of assessment centre as usual?
Yeah, I don't think we haven't had a problem with attendances before, but I think obviously you can't beat 100%, and there's obviously a cost associated with that, and there's an impact on potentially the number of hires that you make on a day, regardless of how big your assessment centres are, whether it's, you know, 4 people or 44 people. You've invited people, you've set a timetable, and you've got an expectation of the conversion rates on those days. So having 1 or 2 drop out, regardless of the number, is impactful. 100% acceptance to briefing calls, running them in Microsoft Teams so that they're familiar with the format of the day, you know, has obviously helped to convert them into continue to come to the assessment centres the next day or the next week. And yeah, I can't, you know, ignore the fact that there are maybe less opportunities to compete with, and ignore the fact that there's less exams maybe happening, or that they've not got to travel, and that might be a blocker. Maybe there's some anxiety issues and things like that that may factor in. So there's some things that we can't ignore. It's not just a case of going, it's easy, they haven't got to travel, you know, they're going to turn up. There's other things that we are fully aware of. But, you know, credit to the candidates, they've acclimatized, they've you know, faced it, you know, full on, and more importantly, they've kept their performance levels to you know, a great state, and we have benefited from that, which is obviously a positive.
Tareen, one of the questions talks about, actually Dan's got a great positive experience, but in your presentation you mentioned some of the barriers that sort of the virtual process might present for candidates. So is there anything that you can think around actually how we sort of replicate Dan's experience to a broader range of employers, particularly where female students are concerned?
So I guess in terms of the barriers, I think it's all about having that open and honest dialogue with them. So instead of kind of sending emails, maybe just picking up the phone and having that chat and instilling that confidence in them. I think that really does help. We have a team of mentors here who normally do a lot of that. So as soon as they kind of have that conversation with someone, and I think it helps more when it comes directly from an employer, it really does instill their confidence, and they feel actually there's no barrier now. I can actually openly talk to someone about these opportunities.
Got it. Another question actually about some of your information, Tareem, was you talked about actually the total number of female students studying STEM subjects. What does that mean in terms of proportion? Is the proportion staying the same, or is that improving as well?
So on that, I mean, there has been a slight increase in the number of females taking up sort of STEM subjects, but it's a very, very slight increase. And if I maybe quickly go back to the slide, you might be able to see. Actually, you can see, I mean, in computer science, 2016-17 was 17,390. Next year, 18,880, and the year 2018-19, 21,080. So there has been an increase, but a very subtle increase.
One thing to kind of add on to that, I mean, one thing we are finding quite popular is a lot of students who don't study STEM subjects are teaching themselves how to do coding in their spare time, learning a programming language. So that's proving to be quite popular amongst female students. Whether or not they have a degree in tech is quite different, because they do realise much later on actually tech is the place to be.
Another question here is, I'm not quite sure if this is directed to, it might, well, we can direct it to all of you. It's actually talking about dealing with specific universities. So do you all actually go and work with specific campuses and specific courses, or is it something that you do at a broader, more national level?
So we work with all sorts of universities. So we don't target a specific university as such, but we do have a very data-centric approach. So we use HESA data to kind of do all our targeting for certain universities. However, we want to keep the options open for students across all universities, purely because, I mean, as you can see, the numbers are already low as it is, especially for women who want to go into STEM careers. So I guess it's just kind of giving everyone the opportunity and the exposure to kind of go into the industry. So there isn't any one particular university we target. We have a very broad approach.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Dan?
Sorry, just going off mute. We don't really have it. Well, we have a few universities that we have that are geographically placed that tend to be fruitful from a large employer that's local. So that can be around the Telford and Worthing areas, for example. But I guess our presence at the universities is not because of the university, but because of the potential subjects that are likely to be more relevant or appealing to people. Backing that up with the digital strategy allows there to remove any social mobility. So we can target those who are in regions of the country where we don't have offices but are looking to relocate for roles. So we try and not leave anybody left out, and we understand there's demographics who want to get into sectors like technology but aren't from STEM subjects, and they're absolutely welcome as well. And we've got some history students who are robotic software developers, to really give you an extreme, because it's been based on passion, interest, and some self-taught stuff that they've picked up. And I think that's the important part, really, particularly around STEM subjects. The number of students we see that have gone beyond the course itself to help differentiate themselves in the market as a strong candidate based on interest and passion and additional hobbies that have become potentially side hustles that are evidently showing that they've got skills or an interest in a subject matter. And I think I'm noticing on places like LinkedIn as well that that demographic is very much more present, forthcoming, and vocal, and seems to be understanding that go-getting nature and that fact-finding nature that will put them in good stead and helps them to understand different sectors, if anything, as well, which will help them at the application and the assessment centre stages. Their commercial awareness seems to be on the rise, I think, and they're less reliant on just the university experience, because there's hundreds of thousands of them coming out each year, and unless they continue to differentiate themselves, there's an abundance of platforms, channels, and things you can do now through digital, regardless of the sector you're going into, whether it's agriculture or IT, that can help position you and build your own brand as well. So there's a bit of onus on them as well at the moment. I know it's not, there's an abundance of roles, and some roles have been cut and things like that, but you know, if you think about it long term, they've got a great opportunity now with potentially more time on their hands to continue to build their portfolio.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. Well, thanks very much, everybody. That's the questions we've gone through. That's been an excellent session. So another virtual round of applause to our presenters. So Dan, Tareem, and Ali. That's great. Thank you very much. As I said at the start, this webinar recording, we'll send a link to you, so be able to go back over if there's anything that you want to recap. Also, please feel free to share it amongst your colleagues when we put it online, and keep an eye out for our future sessions coming through. The broader diversity debate is something we're working on, because I think we are starting to get quite a few concerns, both from those in education and employers, that actually some of those more diverse candidates and those groups of disadvantaged students as well might be some of those that are hardest hit by this crisis. So we're doing some work on that subject at the moment, which we should hopefully bring to you shortly. And also on Tuesday, which is our next webinar, where we will be announcing the results of our survey that we just finished in terms of what exactly is happening with employers in terms of vacancies. So that's the number of students they're planning to recruit this year, both for graduates and apprentices, and also more about people's responses to the coronavirus crisis. So thanks again for your time, everybody. Stay safe, and hopefully talk to you all relatively soon. Cheerio. Bye bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.